Fred watched the first act from backstage through a crack in the curtains. He didn't have to make an appearance on stage until midway through the second act, so he watched fascinated as Act 1 unfolded. He was particularly taken by the obvious chemistry between Esmeralda and Ed the plumber. When the two were on stage together, which was often, the audience seemed mesmerized, spellbound by the intensity created by the two characters. And as he watched, Fred was incredibly envious of Ed, who swaggered and strutted around the ravishing Esmeralda, while she was every bit the Egyptian queen, regal and divine. Intermission arrived, and with it Fred's first serious bout of nervousness. He felt the dancing and darting of butterflies deep down in his guts, and left to go for a breath of air. He stood for a couple of minutes on the backstage fire escape, sucking in huge lungfuls, exhaling slowly out between his teeth. This is it, he thought. Break a leg, he thought, and he plunged back into the theater to do his thing. He stood poised and tense through the opening scenes of Act 2, waiting for his cue to enter. He was to walk straight across the stage, grab up the pitcher of wine on the way, then to where Esmeralda and Ed were reclining on separate couches, plotting the overthrow of the Roman Empire, and pour each of them a cup of wine. It seemed easy enough. What could go wrong? The big moment approached. Then it arrived. "Eunuch," called out Cleopatra, "bring drink for my guest tonight." Out Fred went, right on cue. He marched smartly across the stage, collecting up the wine pitcher on the way. So far, so good. Then he continued his trek to where Antony and Cleopatra were reclined. The good queen offered up her wine goblet, and Fred leaned forward and started to pour. As he did so, and as he had done for weeks in rehearsals, he looked straight at the Egyptian beauty. But on this occasion, instead of completely ignoring him, as she had done for weeks in rehearsals, the ravishing Esmeralda looked straight back at him, so their eyes locked onto each other. Fred felt his knees go weak, and a strange giddy feeling came over him, as if he were back in high school days and the head cheerleader had smiled at him. He was hypnotized by her. He could not look away. And while all these things were happening to Fred, and his emotions were running wild, he completely lost track of the wine. Suddenly, the stunning Cleopatra broke off the eye contact and jumped up from the couch, letting out a tiny cry of surprise as she did so. Fred quickly pulled back the wine pitcher, startled, realizing with horror that he'd spilled wine in the lap of the Queen of the Nile. He stumbled backwards, half falling onto Mark Antony, who scrambled to get out of the way and ended up falling in a jumbled heap onto the floor, his sword breaking with a sharp crack as he crashed onto it. Then, everyone froze. There was awkward silence. The audience sat silent, waiting. Cleopatra, Mark Antony, and the eunuch stayed stock still, eyeing each other. "Forgive me, O great and noble queen," Fred suddenly blurted, struggling back to his feet, then falling to his knees in front of her all in one motion. "Foolish slave," she admonished, playing along. "I was awestruck by your great beauty," Fred answered, perhaps unconsciously realizing that truth is often stranger than fiction. "I was addled and lost my head. I have brought shame to you. I deserve to die." Fred had no idea where the lines had come from. And it was obvious by the expression on Esmeralda's face that she was also somewhat surprised at the turn this scene had taken. But there was no turning back. The die had been cast. He knelt on the floor in front of her. What now? Oh, to be the bard. Finally, something had to be done. Fred stood up. He turned to face the audience. I die, he loudly announced. Then he walked straight to the bedchamber window, which featured a panoramic view of the pyramids, painted by one of the students in Miss Grimshaw's art class at Haileybury High. And with a crash, he threw himself out of it and out of the scene. Antony and Cleopatra stood in silence. The audience sat in silence. The theater was filled with silence. Fred lay behind the bedchamber wall, out of sight of the audience, trying not to groan from the pain caused by his sudden encounter with the stage floor. Poor slave, Cleopatra finally managed. He was a foolish slave, Mark Antony chimed in, getting to his feet, finally getting into the spirit of things. He dared to gaze upon your beauty and has paid for it with his life. Only kings and emperors may look upon one so noble and so beautiful. Good line, thought Fred, grimacing. You are my emperor, my king, Cleopatra answered. I shall be with your help, Mark Antony said. And they again reclined on the couches and began their plotting in earnest. And so the play continued until the snake had its way and the queen lay dead at the final curtain. After the actors and actresses had taken their bows, even Fred, there were accolades all around for the eunuch's quick thinking under the circumstances. The destruction of the pyramid painting was a little disconcerting, but it was agreed that the sacrifice would be worthwhile to save the show. And Miss Grimshaw's art class had 2 days to whip up another before opening night. Despite the accolades, Fred was thoroughly embarrassed by the whole affair. How could such a thing have happened? He had only wanted to know the ravishing Esmeralda better. He had ended up filling her lap with wine and nearly ruining what had been a great performance. He quickly changed out of his Greek-looking tunic and into his street clothes and slunk out the fire escape door toward his car in the parking lot. Just as he was unlocking his car door, he heard a woman's voice. That was pretty quick thinking out there tonight. It was pretty stupid, he answered, turning to see who had spoken. It was her, the Queen of the Nile, also changed into her street clothes. He again felt the giddy feeling and imagined the head cheerleader. Still, you recovered very nicely, she said. You could have made a little less dramatic exit, but it must have been the first thing you thought of. I don't even remember thinking of it, he answered. It was very strange, she said, smiling. It certainly was, he said, returning the smile. They stood for a moment in silence. Could I buy you a coffee, he suddenly asked. Only if you promise not to spill it on me and then jump on the window, she said. It's a promise, he answered, and they both laughed. Thank you.